Hello guys, today I'm making a video on some basics of the C++ programming language. I thought many of you guys would like to know the basics of the C++ programming language, so I thought of why not just making this video. It might help others, right? So the IDE that I'm using here for writing the C++ programming language is Code Blocks. So that's a really good IDE. You guys can freely download it over Chrome or whatever you guys are using. So if you guys liked the video or enjoyed the video, please do like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps a lot. And yeah, let's begin with the video. Okay, so the first thing is, the first piece of line of code that I've written here is include the iOS stream. Now the reason why I've written the include the iOS stream is in order to do some basic calculations for the C++ programming. That's the reason why I've written that piece of code down. So you just need to put a hashtag. Now the second tip that I'm going to say is that in order to write comments or comment any piece of code, you need to just put 2 backslashes. That's the only way of commenting a code. So you can just say hello world. So this piece of text, hello world, by writing 2 backslashes, you're automatically creating a comment in C++ programming languages. Alright? Okay, so now let's move on to the next tip for the C++ programming language. The main important concept for the C++ programming language is this piece of code. So using namespace std, semicolon, int, main, double parentheses, two parentheses, and semicolon brackets, as well as return 0 with a semicolon. Now this piece of text is really important for you guys to remember and understand, because this is where most of the things are going to happen in C++ programming. So I would like you guys to learn it by heart and understand it, and remember to recall this kind of information. Okay, so using namespace std just stands for standard. That's kind of like a rule in C++ programming language, and main function is where we're going to write the pieces of code. And yeah, so the first thing that I'm going to say is in order to write characters, we all know the characters are like this single piece of text, right? Like they represent one unit. For example, the letter B is considered a character. So in order to state a variable that holds a character value, you just need to write char. So what do I mean by this? Is char just means character. So you can write character, letter will be considered as a variable name with the equal sign. Now for character, we have to put single quotation marks. This is to represent a character. So I'm just going to write the character as D. And now in order to close this variable, unlike other programming languages, in C++ you have to put a semicolon in order to close that. Otherwise the code is not going to run. Now if we run this code, the button here means build and run. So if you click on it, it should use the console operator. Here we have the process. The return is 0, so that means nothing is being output on the screen. That's the reason why it's written process 0. Now I'm going to show you in a later bit on how to output stuff on the console operator. Okay, so now let's start with the next one, is strings. Strings, we all know that strings are a piece of text. For example, the name David. David is a piece of text, and which is considered to be a string. Now in order to represent David and to store it in a letter, let's say in a variable, we have to mention its data type. I've noticed that in C++ you have to mention the data types before you store the values or the strings in variables. So we're just going to call this string. That's it. So in order to store a value of data type string, you just need to write string there. String name. Name is considered as a variable. You guys can give any variables you guys like, and you put an equal sign. Now for strings, we have to use double quotation marks. This is another rule of C++ programming language. Whereas for characters, we use single quotation marks. Now for strings, we use double quotation marks. All you need to do is hit that shift button and put that quotation marks, so it's double. Just recall that. I'm just going to write there David. Alright, now in order to close this, you just need to put a semicolon. That's it. Let's move on to the next one. Now numbers. For numbers, we call them like integers, right? So for C++, we just need to write int. That's it. That represents integers, and we're just going to call the variable name as number is equal to. Now for integers, you don't need to put any double quotation marks or single quotation marks. all you need to do is just write the number itself. So I'm just going to call this 9. Once I write 9 there, you have to close this statement with a semicolon. Okay, now let's talk about decimals. Now decimals is an interesting case. In this case, if you're seeing, we can either call this float. In Python programming languages, if you guys want to check out my video on Python, do check it out. In Python programming language, we call it as float to represent any form of decimal value, right? You can also mention float here in the C++ programming language, but preferably we will use the word double to represent decimals. So it's going to call this double, and I'm going to store it in a variable called decimal. That's it. Okay, you guys can give any variables you guys like, and I'm just going to store this as decimal, and the decimal value that I'm going to use is 4.44. So, and you have to close this with a semicolon. Now what happens here is that this value 4.44 is stored in the variable name called decimal, which is closed by a semicolon and has the data type of a double, so that stores a decimal value. Now if we run this code, it's not going to print anything in the output screen, right? It's just going to be written as process printer to be 0. So in order to print something, what you need to do is you need to write cout. The code cout, it just means console output. That's all it means. And then you need to put 2 less than signs. Hit that shift button and write 2 less than signs. Now this is one rule. In Python we use something called, in Python programming language, we use something called print in order to show your output statements. Here we use something called cout. Okay, so that's called console output, and we put 2 less than signs. And all you need to do is you can either print, variables, or you can print statements. So I'm going to show you the first example of printing a statement. So I'm going to say, let's say C++ is awesome. Okay, with an exclamation mark, close that parentheses, and one additional feature that you guys can use is less than symbol again, and write end L. Now end L just means end line, which gives us space when writing the code. And always remember, always close it with a semicolon. Now if we write this code, if we run this code, it should be showing C++ is awesome in the output screen. So if you run this, you have C++ is awesome. If you guys can see clearly, I'm just going to zoom in so that you guys can see. It should be written C++ is awesome on the screen there. Okay, so C++ is awesome, and it should be printed on the screen. Now what happens if you want to print out a variable, right? If you want to print out a value that is stored in a variable. So if I want to print out this letter D, or let's say if I want to print out David, that's stored in the variable name. All you need to do is just write cout. That's it. Put 2 less than signs and just write down the variable name. All you need to do is that, and then if you guys want, you can write an end line statement and close it with a semicolon. So once you do that, you're printing the value, you're printing the string named David in the variable name. Okay, so you're going to print out this variable, and indirectly you're printing out the value that is stored in this variable. So if you run this code, it should print David under C++ is awesome. So if you guys can see clearly in this piece of code, it's showing that C++ is awesome, and you have the name David being written below it. Okay. Now the next part is to understand whether can this print numbers. Of course it can print numbers. So if you write cout less than sign, you just play around with it. It's awesome. You can write decimal, and just, if you guys don't want to put an end line, you just put a semicolon. It should print out your decimal value. So you have 4.44. So this has been printed out, and yeah, it's pretty awesome. Okay, now I've noticed that how do you input statements into the system? So if we output, let's say if we delete all of this piece of code, all right, let's move on to something we call this cout console output less than. Call this like enter a name. Okay, let's just call the statement enter a name. Okay, and then close the double quotation marks, and let's put an end line there. Okay, let's leave the end line and write a semicolon. Okay, so if we run this code, you should say it should print out enter a name. Now, what if you guys want to write something, enter a name? Actually, it can't happen. If you click on it, it will remove the console operation. That's because you're outputting the statement. You're not putting anything that's for input. Now, in order to put a value for input in the console operator, all you need to do is use this word called CIN. CIN just means console input. It's just like how cout represents console output, CIN represents console input. Okay? And now you can't put less and less than signs. That's not going to work. You have to do the opposite of the signs. You're going to put greater signs in order for input. Now, this can only work once you have stated the variable name and once you have done something like that. So here, since the CIN, it will only work once you have stated a variable name. Okay? So, and also once you have done a output statement. So enter a name. Now we can input the name by writing name. I'm going to remove the name value that is stored as David. We're going to delete that and just write the variable name string as name. So in order to be more clear, I'm just going to paste this below so you guys can see it clearly. So in order to use the input function, that is CIN, you need to state the variable name first. You're going to say string name, and your next part is going to be mentioning the output statement that you're going to input your value in, and you're just going to write CIN. Now, if I run this, it should show an error. Actually, the reason why it should show an error is because there is no semicolon. Now, that's the reason why you guys should put a semicolon. Okay, in order to prevent this error, so just put a semicolon and just run this piece of code. Once you run this, you should get no process return. You should be getting a enter a name. I'm just going to write David there, and once you enter that, the process should return 0. So now, as you can see, the process doesn't suddenly disappear like this. You can enter a piece of text once you mentioned your word, CIN. Okay? Alright. Then there are some other libraries as well as you can include in C++, like fstream, this is for file input, IO manipulation. These are some other libraries as well. Now, you can also print out the name once you have inputted, right? Statement. So let me see if we can do that. Once you run this piece of code, you write David. I think it should print David again. So as you guys can see, this can print David again. So once you do that, what if we want to connect two things together? You can do that as well in C++. Right? Once you write cout, put a less than symbol, you can input the name. Let's just delete this piece of code above just to show you guys how the C++ programming is done. So you have cout, less than name. Once you do that, you can put less than in order to connect this, and you're going to put double quotation marks in order to write statement is what, let's say 15. Let's say 20, right? Let's say 20 years old. Once you close that, you're going to write, you're just going to put a semicolon there. You guys can write end line just for cleaning up the code. That would make it really nice. Once you put a semicolon. So this should ask you to enter a name and then print this out as well. So let's see. Let's cut out these spaces. Now, if you run this code, enter a name. Let's say John. Let's say John. It should say John is 20 years old. Now, in order to prevent this, you just need to put a little spacing there. I think that would be nice. Once you run this, if we enter the name John again, it should say that John is 20 years old. Can this also print multiple variables together? It can. If you write decimal, right? If you want to print multiple variables together, you can do that as well. You can say that that the name that John is, close the parentheses, put two less than symbols, and you can say number, put a less than symbol, is 20, put that years old. Okay, once you do that, you're going to put less than symbol again. So here I'm putting two variables in one output function. All right, so if I'm going to delete this equals to 9, and I'm going to ask the user to input their age. Now, in order to do that, like I said, you have to first state the variable name, and you're going to say cout less than, You're going to put double quotation marks in order to write the statement that you want to enter the age, and you're going to put that let's put a semicolon there, and you're going to write CIN, that is a console input. You're going to put a greater sign, and you're going to state what variable you're using, number, close it. Now it should print, let's just clean this up as well, number, and let's see if we run this code. If we run this code, the first thing that they're going to ask is to enter the age. So the age, let's say 20, enter a name. We're going to say John. Now this is going to print, once I hit enter, this should print that John is 20 years old. Enter, it should print John is 20 years old. Just like I said, it should print that really nicely. So if we run this code again, let's say enter the age, 23, enter a name, let's say John again, enter, John is 23 years old. So as you can see, we have used the cout, we have used CIN, we have used the strings, we have used variables, all under the main function, as you guys might have noticed while you run this piece of code. So let's just test it again. I'm just going to quickly write this down so you can see that John is 23 years old, which is being written in this console operation. So these are some basics of C++ programming language. If you guys have enjoyed the video, and do remember that lesson and L just represents, it just helps to give spacing. Okay, that's just one tip. And to comment, you just put 2 backslashes. So I think this is the end of the video. If you guys have enjoyed the video, please do like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps a lot. I've just covered some basics of C++ programming. You guys can play around with the ideas of C++ programming. There are many stuff to do in C++ programming. Do find out the projects online in order to, like simple projects, like you have a simple idea on how to make a piece of code. You just practice with C++. That's one tip that I would like to give. And yeah, this video is mainly covering the basics of C++. And if you guys enjoyed the video, please do like, share, and subscribe. And yeah, I think that's it, guys. Right, bye guys.